This is Judaism Unbound, episode 490, Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're excited to reconnect with our old friends and frequent collaborators, Liana Wertman and Lexi Kohanski from the Torah Studio. The Torah Studio is an accessible and inclusive learning space that encourages people to take ownership of traditional Jewish texts. And over the years, they've been one of our favorite organizations to partner with on digital holiday events for Purim, Sukkot, the 9th of Av, and especially our annual Apocryphest initiative for Hanukkah. Today, our jumping off point is a recent initiative of the Torah Studio called Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times. Before we start, a quick reminder of another way to get through these terrible times, the Oral Talmud, our newest addition to Judaism Unbound's family of podcasts. It's now available everywhere podcasts are found. It's hosted by B'nai Lappi and me, and the Oral Talmud is meant for both beginners to Talmud study and longtime learners. It's an exploration of Talmud through the traditionally radical lens pioneered by B'nai Lappi, and by listening into our study partnership as we explore foundational stories and material from the Talmud, you'll discover the how-to manual that the ancient rabbis left behind for future generations, for us, to help us reimagine new versions of Judaism after the previous versions crash in B'nai's language. Learn more at oraltalmud.com or at judaismunbound.com/oraltalmud, or go to any of your favorite podcast apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Oral Talmud. And now let's dive into our conversation. As a reminder, the Torah Studio's vision is a world where every learner, regardless of where they're coming from and where they're going, has a way into Torah and a hand to guide along every step of their learning journey. And our guests today, Liana Wertman and Lexi Kohanski, are in charge of making that happen. Liana Wertman is the founder and executive director of the Torah Studio, which has enabled her to teach Torah to thousands of students around the world, including through Hebrew Union College, My Jewish Learning, the Brandeis Camp Institute, and of course, Judaism Unbound. She has a master's degree in educational leadership and Jewish learning from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and she studied at Pardes, Yashrut's Classic Talmud program, and Svara's Pedagogy Chabura. In 2022, Liana Wertman won the Covenant Foundation's Pomegranate Prize for Emerging Leaders in the Field of Jewish Education. Lexi Kohanski is the Torah Studio's Director of Online Learning. She's a trans-Jewish educator who focuses on empowering those of us who have not felt home in Judaism to own our text and traditional lifeways. Lexi Kohanski's first publication was entitled Be Whole, a halachic approach to gender and transition. Lexi Kohanski gives regular sermons on spiritual resilience and survival through her podcast, Torah for Trans Lives, and she's also designing a first-of-its-kind tabletop role-playing game called Worlds to Come to teach classical Hebrew. Previously, Lexi Kohanski was an actor, a teacher of English as a second language, and a farmer. She has studied at the conservative yeshiva, Pardes, Svara, Hadar, Maharat, and Yashrut. That's a lot of places. So Lexi Kohanski, Liana Wertman, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
What an honor to be here, Dan and Lex.
So wonderful to be here.
So I was thinking that we could start with one of the offerings that you're doing at the Torah Studio called Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times. And I guess I just want to start with understanding, what is that? What happens there? Because it sounds like something that we need.
Yeah. Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times is an interview series between me, Lexi, and a different, very interesting trans person each week. And basically what we do is just talk about one piece of Torah, by which we mean any piece of wisdom at all, that is getting them through these terrible times. And it is open to everyone. It's free for trans people, but we are all going through terrible times, hence our collective terrible times. And there's Torah from trans people that we think needs to be shared. We brought on a lot of very amazing people, Chavita Cordova and Binya Koatz, friends of this podcast, Jay Dragon, Autogynophiles Anonymous, Misha Halab, Ezra Furman, Joy Layden, Rena Yehuda Newman, of Judaism Unbound, and also Lainey Solomon. And everyone brought really different kinds of...
Well, by the way, show notes to all of their episodes. Most of those people are former guests on the podcast. So we're going to just throw links to all of their episodes with us into the show notes for folks who are interested.
You know them, you love them. And the kinds of things they brought were really diverse. We had some people bringing like pieces of Talmud and pieces of Chassidus, pieces of Midrash, all sorts of different genres of like classic capital T Torah, but also people brought comic strips and academic articles about like anti-fascist philosophers, and J Dragon brought a board game, and we like, that's Torah, and we talked about it. Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times is an offering we were very excited about, and it's also pretty different from a lot of the stuff that we usually do at Torah Studio. I've been thinking about this principle. One of Rabbi Yishmael's 13 tools for interpreting Torah is that if there's an exception to the group, the way in which that thing is exceptional actually teaches you something about the group itself that it's an exception of. I don't see trans people as exceptions in a world that is like falling apart. I think that trans people are in some ways at the front of the cliff that's falling apart, but we're all standing on the cliff. That's the idea behind it being Our Terrible Times, which is to say, like, Torah as a source of wisdom for how we live lives that are sacred and meaningful is about the human experience. And every human has an experience that's relatable. So when we're inviting trans people to bring their Torah and talk about what is getting them through this moment that we're all living through, it's just one angle that we're particularly suited to be inviting people to talk Torah about. I'm personally invested in trans Torah as a trans person myself, but at the end of the day, there is no Torah that is only for one type of person. There's Torah that one type of person might be able to get more and then share more with the whole world. And we really want that. You know, the people who aren't trans who came to Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times in our Q&A sessions had some of the best questions. The fact that it wasn't only trans people made me feel like for this particular thing, we are doing the work we're supposed to be doing here. There's times when it is appropriate and like needed for trans people to have our own spaces. And I personally run some of those spaces, but at the Torah Studio, our focus is really more on everyone owns the Torah. And like, what do you in particular need to feel like you own the Torah?
When we originally were thinking about how to run this class, the original title was just Trans Torah for Terrible Times. And people were telling us, oh, so it's just for trans people. That title, along with the idea that it was free for trans people, was making cis people feel less welcome, which, you know, everyone is going to decide if they feel welcome in a space or not. I am a cis person who feels very welcome in the Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times space. Because exactly what Lexi was sharing. This is a terrible time for all of us, and we all deserve deep wisdom of I'm suffering, and how do I spiritually move myself safely through these times? And how do we do that collectively? It's hard to deny that in this moment, if I could learn some of that soul-nourishing Torah from a trans person, I am really learning something that could sustain me for a long time. There's no denying that our trans friends are deeply under attack in this exact moment. And if they can use this Torah to survive, then I definitely could. And it has been incredibly healing for me to get to learn this Torah, to be told over and over again, I'm hurting. Here's Torah that makes me feel seen and cared for. And the fact that it's trans is worth mentioning to everybody because it's important to highlight, but fundamentally it is just Torah for our terrible times. We want people to know that the Torah part means that they are included. And the trans part is one of the qualifiers that helps us explain to people that if trans people are included, we also are talking about you.
So before I ask this, I have a question about the word Torah. So we just looked a little bit at the word trans. Like, we're not just going to go through for and our and terrible and times. That's not like how the linear, we're not going to be that linear with this episode. But we spoke with you, Liana, a number of years ago. And I don't remember all the ins and outs of that episode, if I'm being fully honest, but I do know that we spent some time, and we've spent time with you in other contexts, thinking about what Torah is, with a capital T, with a lowercase t, with both, whatever. You've given us some of that, both of you, so far already, but I'd love to sort of check in and ask, okay, so what is Torah generally, but also like, how has the Torah Studio's relationship to the what is Torah question evolved, flowed, grown, shifted, I don't know, over the years? Because this is a great moment for us to think about what it is to be leading a Jewish organization as it matures, as it shifts, as it grows. Can you talk to us, both of you, a little bit about how you understand that word Torah and to what extent that definition has sort of shifted as you've grown to understand things about your students and your teachers in the Torah Studio?
When I look back, I think actually Torah Studio is exactly where I would have wished it was 4 years ago. It's changed in all the ways that I hoped it would. And that means that Torah Studio has opened up to new types of classes than I would have expected. I think 4 years ago, I would have said Torah is a lot more literal than I would allow it to be now. That Torah is a set of books, that Torah is something solid for us to really hold onto together. And I would still 1000% say that the Torah is something really solid that we can all attach to, not because we have to love it, but because it gives us something to all talk about together. The thing that has changed for me, I'd say, is how much more willing I am to see that Torah on a broad scale, that I am much more willing to accept how different people are going to come to Judaism and need Torah. And I'm not defining it capital T, little t yet, because where I personally will probably mostly just teach Parsha classes and teach a lot of courses that are rooted in capital T, 5 books of Moses Torah, Jewish experience around sacred text and around what we decide is sacred, bringing people together to have conversations about Torah, whether that is Chumash, 5 books of Moses, classic Torah, or it's something, like we're struggling and we need to share wisdom with one another. I've rooted what Torah Studio does a lot more in how we do it than in what texts we're studying in the last 4 years. So I'd say that's one of the biggest changes. And I think Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times and the other classes that we're running and the people we're gathering are a great example of that. And also having Lexi on the team was a big change, who's been with us for the last 2 years, 3 almost. So most of the time since. And I'd say a lot of that growth has happened because of getting to work with her.
I've been thinking a lot about this question for myself and my personal life. Like, what is the Torah and what does it mean to me? Part of what we do at the Torah Studio is just model being honest about where we're at with the Torah and what we actually think about it as teachers, and that opens up space for students to do it too. Torah, in one sense, is just a text that you can read like kind of any other text, or it's a set of texts, 5 books of Moses, Talmud, etc., like all the way down the line. But it's also a practice. Like, one of the things that grounds my relationship with Torah is when all the rabbis in the Talmudic time, they're all sitting in an attic and someone's like, which one's more important, study or action? And there's a debate by both opinions. And then everybody says study is great because it leads to action, which is to say, like, the Torah is a text you can read that wants you to do something. It is essentially a practice. And so the kinds of people who come to Torah Studio and find a home here are the kinds of people who want to engage with the text as a spiritual practice. And when we start talking about practice, especially with Jewish observance, that can start to feel like, oh, I'm telling you what to do. The teacher becomes someone who's like instructing you on how to live your life in a pretty specific way, like do the mitzvahs, like keep kosher, all this stuff. And the way I've been thinking about it more is the Zohar has this amazing phrase. There's this idea that there are 613 mitzvahs, 613 commandments about how to live a sacred life in the Torah. And the Zohar calls them the 613 atin, the 613 pieces of advice. Just good advice that we really think you should listen to. And if you listen to them, we're pretty sure as teachers, as people who live lives of Torah broadly, we're pretty sure if you listen to this advice, your life will be better and the world will be better. But at the end of the day, All we're doing is giving you advice, is showing you what's on the table, is walking you through the garden of the tradition. And like what you do with the garden, how you enjoy it, or if you come in at all, that's ultimately up to you. As a teacher who like believes in her students, that when her students show up to the classroom, they already own the Torah. Whatever kind of relationship they're coming in with, it already belongs to them. If you don't want to play in the garden, that's ultimately like a decision I'm going to have to be okay with. If you decide the Torah is not for you after I show you here's what I love about it and give you an opportunity to find your own voice in it, you might not stay, and that's got to be okay with us, you know? That's the only way that people can be real in their relationships with Torah. Lex, you asked, like, what is Torah to us now? And in a way, Torah is the books on the shelf. And for Torah Studio, Torah is like ultimately like about our texts, the corpus of the tradition that you can read and do and try to put into practice. But like at the end of the day, what the Torah is something everyone has to decide for themselves. It's not something I can tell you. The best outcome for me is you've got your own answer to that question, and we all get to talk about it together.
There's certain stories from the Talmud that get quoted enough that even people who aren't diehard Jewish learners end up hearing about them somewhere. And one of them is about what Torah is. But it's not usually framed as such. So the story I'm thinking of, it's part of a long stretch of the first section of the Talmud, the section on blessings. And I think it matters that it's towards the beginning of this entire corpus. We don't always notice when things are at the beginning or the end because the Talmud is kind of this ongoing cyclical thing. But I do think that it matters that certain things were put first. Early in this text, we get this little nugget, and it's part of a few nuggets, but the one that's most often quoted is, this guy hides under the bed of his rabbi while his rabbi is having sex, which, violation of some boundaries, not great. Then the rabbi notices this fella under the bed, and he says, like, what are you doing? And the response is usually misquoted. So when people tell this story, they usually say, the fella beneath the bed responds, this meaning like sex, this too is Torah. Sex is also Torah. It does not say that. There is no to. There is no gam. There is no also. It says Torahi. By putting the word to in, it implies it's kind of a supplementary Torah. But that's not what it says. It says Torahi. And I think, there's all sorts of rabbis and all sorts of people talking about how Torah is a broader term than we give it credit for, that Torah is something we create, that Torah is not just text, and the two of you are part of that, absolutely. But I think a lot of folks kind of take it as, that's really sweet, like, that's nice. But is that kind of a new take? Is that like a postmodern vision? And no, I actually think that the word Torah means it means teaching. It's from the word for moreh, for a teacher, for somebody who guides through learning. And I think that matters. It's also arguably related to the word for parents, which is interesting. Horim, I don't know whether linguists would take that as fully true.
I think it is. I think it's the same root, like to instruct.
Yeah, we'll consult our linguistic friends, but I think that there is at the very least a strong evidence of some connection there. And to me, the essence of that story is that Torah is being generated in that moment. It's not just that sort of sex as a realm is Torah. It's that the student under the bed is identifying that Torah is something that is created day to day by people anew. It doesn't just live in frozen text. And so I'd love to hear about that side of things, because what's so fun about this is you have this deep connection to the books on the bookshelf. You recently had a class about the book, like the classic notion of the Jewish bookshelf. And, Liana, you've been our core partner on Apocryphest, which is about exploding the idea that Torah lives in a particular set of books, and even in books at the expense of other things entirely. So can you talk to us a little bit about the Torah that isn't just the bookshelf, but also that which is generated through your students, through your teachers, through our bodies, all those pieces?
I agree with what you're saying, Lex, that our actions in the world, the way we live, the stuff we do every day generates Torah. In my position as a teacher, especially a teacher who mostly works online, which is an amazing space that's opening up for Judaism. And we should talk about that too. But as a teacher who works online, it's most of where I'm able to reach people is in text and in conversations about text. We're not then going to like have a meal together even, let alone like have access to each other's apartments to break into them and have a voyeuristic adventure, however instructive that may be. But I agree, the stuff we do says a lot. And like in the Trans Torah for Our Terrible Time series, the things that people brought as Torah were not only texts. Someone brought a board game, and we talked about that for like an hour and a half. What the board game, which is about gay club culture in Victorian England. And we talked about that as Torah. Part of the line for me, I guess, is like, okay, so anything's Torah, so the word doesn't mean anything. Part of it is like where we started the conversation, there are tools for interpreting Torah. And part of it is like, well, when we think about anything in that way, in a way that we treat Torah, there's Torah there to be uncovered. When the student under the bed says, that's Torah, you're treating it like Torah. You could miss the opportunity for the Torah that's there if you don't see it that way. Another angle on the idea that Torah is being generated in our lives all the time relates to me to this Hasidic concept that every Jew is a letter in the Torah. There's a whole bunch of letters, like physical letters in a Torah scroll, and like everyone is one of those letters, and like you find yourself in the Torah, you're a part of the Torah. But to me, it also says the Torah, in a sense, is not alive without us to live it. Torah needs us to encounter it on the page and then bring it to life through our speech acts and through our embodied acts. And like that actually is where Torah lives. I kind of think of the books on the shelf as like those museums where they preserve those stuff in glass jars and you can like look at them and like get a lot of cool stuff out of this thing that couldn't exist if it hadn't been like frozen and preserved. But on the page, it is frozen and preserved. The amazing thing that differentiates a flower in a glass jar from a text is when you encounter the text, it encounters you and you bring it to life and you then get to do it and your life changes a little bit. Your trajectory is nudged. You're moving in a new direction now. Could also be true about the flower. All to say, the Torah needs us to do it. The sense of study's great because it leads to action. Study's only great if it changes you. And if you change it, it's a relationship.
The story that I think about a lot as a metaphor for all this is The Wizard of Oz, right? Which I worry about spoiling, but I mean, I don't know, it's 100 years old or whatever. So I don't think we should worry about spoiling The Wizard of Oz. But
well, some parts of it were 100 years ago. We've got Wicked and like you could
I'm talking
argue
about
it's
the
actually
OG.
an unfolding story, like the Torah.
True, for sure. And some of Wicked undermines some of what I'm about to say. But in terms of the OG Wizard of Oz, the idea right at the end is that the wizard, who has no real magic, right, gives these awards, these medals at the end of the movie, the book, whatever, to the, the Cowardly Lion gives courage, and to the Tin Man gives a heart, and to the Scarecrow gives a brain. And the idea is that they actually already had them, and that he wasn't really giving it to them, but somehow that giving of the medal, they also experienced that as moving. And for a lot of times, like, I thought of it just that way. And then I realized, you know what, actually they didn't fully have them. They needed the journey to fully have them. The Cowardly Lion actually was cowardly until he was tested by a certain journey and then showed that he actually did have courage deep down. And so the wizard didn't give it to them, but it also wasn't quite as simple as they always had it. And the reason why I think this is relevant to this question about what the Torah is I think that sometimes the counter reaction to what I think we all agree in this Zoom room, at least, that the Torah thought of as merely written documents is a kind of a dead hand, or like that can't be all it is. And actually, it never has been, right? There's always been a live interpretive tradition within Judaism that has been part of it. But even then, that right to interpret was kind of closely held to a particular small group of folks. The flip side of that is like that stuff isn't important at all. We can receive revelation anywhere, anytime. I've also been open to that idea. In other words, I think that it would be better if folks were a little bit more comfortable with the idea of revelation, right? Of the idea that I, through my experience, can actually channel truth without necessarily having to point to it in a text. But I actually think that the middle position is the one I'm most excited about, right? The one that says the text plays a role. The text is important. What is the text exactly? I think that we could debate that. I've thought of it as a shadow, right? That Torah is actually something three-dimensional, and the text is a two-dimensional shadow of that three-dimensional thing. And it tells us a lot about the three-dimensional thing, but it isn't actually the three-dimensional thing. Another way to encounter that three-dimensional thing is just to encounter it. And maybe we do that through our life experience. And yet somehow to encounter it directly and not have a relationship with the text is also to miss something, right? It's also to miss perhaps how others have experienced it in the past, which we wouldn't fully appreciate if we just thought we were experiencing this for the first time through like a direct experience. So I'm wondering, what you make of all that, but also whether in a way there's a route into this through a trans experience, which I don't have. I'm looking to understand that there are certain things that I cannot experience directly. And yet, if I could somehow be in relationship with someone who has experienced it directly, it would benefit me. And that's what's exciting to me about trans Torah, not just for trans folk, right? And so I'm curious what you make of all that.
Lexi will definitely answer the part about trans experience, but I just want to link a little bit of what you were just saying, Dan, about the Wizard of Oz and this idea of both something being within you and not accessible to you at the same time. And I'm coming back to, Lex, the text you brought in, this idea of someone hiding under a bed and saying, this is Torah, I need to learn it. And I'm actually, as we were talking about this, and I was really thinking about that person laying under the bed wanting to learn more Torah, we can assume that someone who is going to hide under the bed of their rabbi is trying to learn something specific, and they don't really know what that is. And they are looking to someone that they trust to help them find it. And it's a bit like that journey. That knowledge would definitely have been inside of that person, and no one helped them find it. No one told them it's in you already. You don't have to go hide under someone's bed. You don't have to sneak into a room. You don't have to pretend you're not there. There are times where I can look at someone and say, hey, that's Torah. But there are also times where I can say, hey, that is also Torah. It's a little tangential, it's a little to the side, but it doesn't matter any less because it's your Torah. And one of the things that happens when we actually look at that student, we pull them out from under the bed and we don't just say, what are you doing? We say like, hey, what do you need? Why are you here? What was this trying to fulfill for you? We're actually able to turn to them and say, we see you in this text. Let me help you see you in this text. And then let me help you talk about that. Because it's one thing to see yourself and just like be reading a book and be like, wow, this character is just like me, and put the book down and walk on with your day. But Torah Studio, even in an interview class like Trans Torah for Our Terrible Times, we will not let people remove themselves from that space. We definitely demand that they show up, not just to confront the text, right? To say, I'm here, I'm in it, but also to say like, and this is what I think. What do you think? What do you think? Right? Chavruta, the actual process of learning these texts with another person, and then again with an entire group of people, is where that transformation happens, right? Because the cowardly lion had courage in him the whole time, but it also took other people thinking it could be there. It took other people going along with him. It took other people paying attention and putting them in situations where they could actually find out that they are different than they believed they were, or stronger than they believed they were. And being a good teacher is holding hands with your students and saying, I'm right here next to you because we are both in this Torah. And one of the things I love the most about Torah Studio and the fact that we are highlighting each individual student who's coming in is that there's trans Torah, there's engineers Torah, there's therapists Torah, there's podcast host Torah, right? Like every individual person is coming in with their whole Torah. And I'm saying, this is Torah. Don't hide under my bed. Get out of here. Let's explore this together. Let's be here together without needing it to go to a particular place or to become a particular person or to do a particular thing. It's the fact that Torah allows us to hold hands over one path together that makes it so special. And it's especially the fact that that path has been trod by us and by our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors and their ancestors. And sometimes our parents and our ancestors refused to walk, but they refused to walk on the same path that we're choosing or not choosing to walk down. And that is why we specifically use Jewish texts, is for that rooting. But it is also why we really see them as taking us far beyond those texts and the words within them.
I want to try to be careful with this answer because, like, when we're talking about identity, and in particular, like a marginalized identity, being trans, being gay, being a woman, I'm just naming ones that I hold. It's a hot issue that's like hot to hold, hot to touch, and also hot isn't exciting. But when we're talking, when like I'm talking about a trans experience, if I'm trying to do that in a way that like is responding to oppression or responding to me not being given space or speaking about how I'm being denied things that I need because of my transness, that's a place where it's appropriate for someone else to say, I'm not trans, I need to just listen to this. And then there's the way in which our identities are just another face of God, in the way that every person is another face of God. And I don't want to draw a strong distinction because even in the classroom, there is politics in the background or the foreground that's happening. But at the core of what we're doing when we do Torah study as a sacred practice is we're talking about our relationship with God. We're talking about being in the world. That is something that we can all learn from everyone together. And in fact, we have to. So when I'm talking about how my trans experience teaches me Torah, I believe that that is always going to be Torah that everyone can in some way relate to, that everyone can benefit from hearing, and that everyone can have their own thoughts about and find themselves in and then share back to me. And then I do the same thing. What you, Dan, and Liana were just saying about the Wizard of Oz story, and is that how I see things? And Liana, you had this phrase that like, it's in you, but it's not accessible. The lion's courage was in him, but he couldn't use it. He couldn't find it, didn't know it was there. The Torah is in us. There's this beautiful midrash that about like when you're a fetus in the womb, there's ner daluk al rosho. There's a light burning above your head, and the angel is teaching you all of Torah, and then you forget it, meaning it's in you, but it's not accessible. You have to go through a journey to uncover it. And this feeling of it's there, but you can't access it, really, that like made me cry. That's like about my journey of coming to understand that I'm a woman. Now that I'm on the other side of it, I can look back and I can say, yeah, that was always there. But I didn't have what I needed to be able to know that it was there, or to be able to stand in that reality and be able to live it and put it into practice. It's all part of Torah. The Zohar says the words of the Torah are the body of the Torah. But the Torah has a soul, and the Torah's soul has a soul. And that's the text of the Torah is a shadow. And the Torah itself is a 3D object that we maybe only exists in physical space in what we do. And then the like actual Torah that like never changes and is just like constant energy flowing and changing and like morphing form, but in its essence doesn't change. That's like a tesseract, which is a 4-dimensional cube whose shadow is the 3-dimensional cube, whose shadow is the 2-dimensional text. I personally feel like that metaphor really works for me because I have an experience of my body not being the end of my story. But for everyone, your body is not the end of your story, no matter what that exactly means to you.
I wonder if we could say that the cowardly lion couldn't have found his courage if the Tin Man wasn't also finding his heart, right? That it actually is the fact that we're all doing this journey together, that we are all being honest and trying to find ourselves, right? If I was going on a journey to find my courage and everybody else on the journey was like, I mean, I'm good. I don't need to change. I don't need to look for myself. I'd be like, well, that's pretty embarrassing for me to suddenly be like, well, I'm cowardly. Like, I need to be in process with other people who are in process. That includes the teacher, that includes the fellow students, it includes that people are bought into growing and finding themselves. And it takes all of us walking together and doing it on purpose to do that. I cannot find my Torah if trans people aren't able, and the trans people in my classes aren't able to find themselves, and vice versa. How can I find, if a trans person can never find themselves in Torah, then I can't. Because we all are there or we're not, right? We're all in this shadow or we're not. And I think we feel better when we know that someone else is there too.
Yeah, I mean, this shadow piece, I mean, Dan, I'm really grateful to you generating that. I want to make an argument that this is hinted at in the text of what people tend to call the Torah itself. This process of taking two-dimensional and making it three-dimensional. I think if we were going to distill the Torah's best example, if we were going to identify the Torah, 5 books, best example of instantiating sacred through the making of something three-dimensional, it would be the tabernacle. The construction of, it's basically like a house for God. People don't want to say that because God is supposed to be everywhere and God doesn't live distant, but like that's what the image is that you're building a house for God and you're finding all these beautiful jewels and colors and sacred things and you're making it. What's the name of the fella that was asked to do this? B'tzalel, in the shadow of God. This notion of shadow, I think people think of shadows as like what they're not, or what, like shadows are sort of the remnant. Like shadows are scary. I actually like that too for a metaphor for Torah. There are ways in which the Torah, the text of it, is like it creates fear. Like a lot of us in our earliest journeys through Torah had to surmount a sense of this is scary. This is hard to comprehend. Even if I do comprehend it, the text of what it says brings fear to me. It doesn't just bring me comfort. That's still the case, by the way. Like I still am terrified at elements of the text of the Torah and certainly ways that people channel it. But just going back to the B'tzalel, I don't think that the names we have of people in Torah are random. This is where I get mystical. This is where I also, like Lexi, sort of start to, maybe the Lexi thing. The word Lex, of course, ties to lexicon. So we're just lovers of language. But like B'tzalel allows us to find the magic in the shadow. That is the person who is chosen. By the way, the Talmud says B'tzalel, this fellow who leads the entire construction of God's house, it says B'tzalel had to be 13 years old. He was a youngin'. And I always like to cite that as a reason why we shouldn't sort of infantilize folks who are on the younger side of our community, because God chose somebody that age to build the whole thing. I think that the question I have is kind of interlocked with that, and it gets to what, Lexi, you brought up and what I know both of you are interested in about digital Judaism. This interface between shadow and person making the shadow or structure making the shadow. Like, there's a relationship between that and like the digital world where we exist. It's funny, like I'm talking to each of you as a two-dimensional rectangle, right? Like you aren't like that's the downside, right? There's not depth. There's not a Z-axis to our relationship right now. There's just an X and Y axis of the screen, like vertically and horizontally. And that's the downside. But if we're talking about sort of image and shadow versus fullness, I believe that when we relate through this two-dimensional object that is a screen, that also plants the seed for us to sort of yield three-dimensional material reality in Torah. And so I know that your organization has done a lot of thinking about what it is to learn in the digital world specifically. So I'm curious to hear your reflections on what it is to operate in this digital world, and also why it seems, I mean, two groups that are so disproportionately represented in our digital world, Jewishly, are trans folks and folks who, converts, Jews by choice. And both of those relate to our Wizard of Oz story of people that are currently on or have been on journeys. And so I'm just kind of curious what we might yield from that and how it relates to our digital context that we're kind of neighbors in, you and us.
Naming that what we're doing when we're coming together online is in some ways a two-dimensional activity in the same way that engaging with the Torah's text is a two-dimensional activity is really incredible, because it helps us understand that something we are called to do when we're doing anything online, but especially learning Torah online, is that we're being asked to do something spiritual just in our showing up in this space. If drawing the 2D inputs of the Torah's text into the world is a spiritual thing, and like we're building the tabernacle, or we're building our society, that's a spiritual practice. Also, when I see you on my computer screen, if I want to make you a real person, the same way I want to make the Torah a real thing I'm relating to, if I want to make you a real person, I have to put in some energy to that to make the image I'm getting of you into something that's really here for me. I think that's like an incredible opportunity to practice a kind of spirituality of being with the other as a real person that like we could really use a lot more of that in everything we do. If it's something we have to do through a computer screen, it's also something we have to do when we're bodies in a space. We also have to put in some effort to see the other person is actually here. So that's like really broad. Something that I appreciate about being able to learn online is that we highlight that spiritual component of what it means to show up for each other. And there's like technical stuff that is better about the digital context. We can have a conversation out loud, and also at the same time, people can be sharing things in the chat. And it's like a page of Talmud. You've got our conversation in the middle, and all around is like all this amazing stuff that is being shared about that. That's in some ways its own conversation happening at the same time. That's something you could never do in a physical context. And you can get people to show up to the space who don't have spaces of their own to show up to without the internet. This is something that I think queer people have known for a long time, that the internet is a place where we can find each other when the physical world is something that seems to be really trying to keep us apart. Queer people and trans people have like lived on the internet almost since the internet existed, and we like know how to do that. I don't know that we're always great at doing it in terms of how we treat each other, but we know how to do it, and we know that it matters. And I think that's maybe one thing about why there's a lot of trans Jews on the Jewish internet, on Jewish learning spaces that are online. We know how to show up there, and we know how to be ourselves online in a way that like other people may still be learning.
There's another aspect of being online that reaches folks who are still struggling to find themselves and therefore find themselves in Jewish community, right? When you are in the middle of trying to figure out who you are, it is a lot scarier to come into a new place and say, I'm in free form, I'm figuring this out. And there are people who, or moments where we really want that bravery, or spaces where we really want to be infused. But there are moments in our lives where we feel a little too open to be ready to take any criticism, right? And I think for trans folks who are finding who they are, for converts who are finding who they are in completely new ways, there are a lot of spaces where that's going to feel really difficult to even try. And coming online allows them to at least have a physical safety that they can guarantee for themselves. They can click out of that room the second they want to. And that doesn't mean that that's actually how they're going to emotionally show up. But I do think that there's a massive aspect of accessibility that says, I'm going to let you have some boundaries up. And those boundaries can be the physical ones, but I'm going to ask you to, if you're going to actually show up, then we are going to ask you to pull down some of those emotional boundaries in a way that actually when you're in person, I don't think you always get, that you've put yourself in a physically vulnerable space. And so you're a little less open to being emotionally vulnerable. The person you're fighting with is right there. And when you're online, one of the things that we're able to do is like, look at the shadow of the Torah of the other person and be able to really hold it, because there's a really safe distance. What I've found is that most people who are coming to any class feel less than. They just feel less than in some capacity, and not just because they're trans or not just because they're converts. People who have been to day school, who went to Jewish education every single day of their young lives, come to me and say, wow, I come to this class and I don't feel Jewish enough. And I'm like, the person who made you not feel Jewish enough told me 2 weeks ago that they've never read Torah before. It's that we are giving people in any case an opportunity to be vulnerable, to be themselves. And online offers a really rare opportunity to do that and have that vulnerability while the rest of you stays safe.
Well, Liana, I just want to actually follow up on what you're talking about in two ways. But number one is, having now spoken so eloquently about the power of online spaces, I'm curious how you think now about offline spaces, because I think in the early days of the Torah studio, right, the idea was that it was going to be a physical space and people would drop in like a yoga studio. And I'm curious, like, how you think about that vision today, or not necessarily for the Torah studio as an organization, but just like for us as Jews, what's the balance between online and offline experiences? And the other thing that just your talking was raising for me was something I've been thinking about recently, different ways to think about leadership. And I think it'd be different ways that we think about educators. And actually, I've been thinking about this recently as different ways that we think about parents. And then maybe it kind of flows from there. That I think we more or less agree that the ideal of good parenting is to make your children able to be on their own and to not be dependent on you. And yet, I know this as a parent, there's something very lovely about your children being dependent on you that you feel kind of sad about letting go of. And I think that probably unconsciously, in a certain way, you might try to maintain, even though, intellectually, it's the wrong thing. And I've been thinking recently about how that maps onto Jewish leadership and thinking a lot about how it feels like our sense of what Jewish leadership is in most of the Jewish world is like that kind of bad parenting that says, I'm going to keep the people dependent on me because I like it. And also, I have a lot to give.
Because then they'll pay dues.
Well, I don't want to get cynical about it, but yes. But I just want to focus on the emotional element of it, like putting that to the side for it. Just saying, like, not only does it feel good to me, but also I have a lot to give. I mean, by the way, as a parent, I'm like, well, my children, they're grown, but I still have so much left to give. I just, wait, before you leave, I have this to say, and I wonder if there's an element of that. But I also think that there's this other image of leadership or of an educator, of what education is, which is that fundamentally it's about empowering. And it's about trying to kind of get you out of the nest as quickly as we can. And I'm just sort of curious where you are on that these days.
First answer, I wish that we had chat and mute in person. Do you know what is happening on chat? Side comments are happening on chat. Interruptions are happening in the chat, right? When we are in person, I almost forgot, for 2 years I taught Torah online. And for 2 years, I taught Jews and no one interrupted each other because you couldn't, you were muted. You waited until you were done. And it was like not interrupting for someone to make a pun on something I had just said, rather than interrupting me in the middle of what I said to go, Torah he, more like Torah she, which is what I was going to chat into us.
Hey.
I could have chatted that and we'd all have a cute little laugh without Lex pausing.
Context for the listeners, that's what it means in Hebrew. Torah he means she. So
I mean, there's so many layers, but I think that the biggest thing that I miss when I teach in person again is that we love talking over one another. I am a huge proponent of Jewish cooperative overlapping, that we do finish each other's sentences and talk over. But for new folks learning Torah, that can be really hard. And so actually being on Zoom gives people really solid boundaries that often we don't have normalized in Jewish learning spaces in person. So that's one thing that I would say is the chat and the fact that we interrupt each other is a massive difference. There is a huge loss I feel when I'm in a room that I don't get to hear people's silly thoughts that they don't think are worth saying out loud. That's what the chat is for. The thoughts that people did not feel safe enough, excited enough, trusted themselves enough to say out loud, they will type. That is amazing. And especially for people who are not speakers in big spaces, people who had said 30,000 incredible things in their chavruta, but we're never going to say them out loud in a discussion, I still get to hear them. So that is a massive thing that I think we miss when we lose online, that we're not giving enough credit for. And I think in the reverse, that has helped us really think about what our students really need to say at all, right? I think what it's done is, and Lexi and I were just talking about this the other day, what it comes down to, Dan, is that Lexi and I have a deep pedagogy of trust. We believe that we need to trust our students. And I don't get to decide what they think about a text. I also don't get to decide what they're going to do about it. What I can do is be in real relationship with them, give them the scaffolding and support that they need to find themselves and their voice in the text, to help them practice that. But really, ultimately, I have to trust them to find themselves in the text. I cannot find them for them. I can only sit there and find myself alongside them, like we talked about, right? It actually is being on the path together that matters. And being on the path with your child is sometimes holding their hand because they're scared. But sometimes it's letting go of their hand because they're not scared. And it's noticing that you're the one who's scared and needs to let go or doesn't. And you turn around and turn to your child and say, hey, could you actually hold my hand? I need your support right now because I trust you. And I know that we're on this path together. Can you teach me? When I learn something too well, I stop teaching it and I start lecturing it. And I think that those are important differences and they are both worthwhile. I listen to lectures all the time. I love getting download information. But when I know something or think I know a text too well, it should become a lecture because I'm no longer open to having the text fully changed for me, to having someone know the text actually secretly better than I do. If I can't have that openness, then I shouldn't be teaching that. I shouldn't be in a teaching experience with that text. I can just tell people what I know about that text. That trust, especially, it should go to children, but especially when we're teaching adults, that trust is essential and often missing.
I really appreciate that we're talking about how our feelings affect the work we do. Like, I am a scared parent who doesn't want to let go of their kid because of my fear. There's a lot of fear. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for Jews to be afraid about all sorts of stuff. But the point is, if we don't name it and think really seriously about it, those feelings are going to define the way we show up in the world. What should be teaching becomes, in the worst cases, indoctrination, and in the best cases, just not talking to them, not relating to them. So I would love if we, as a Jewish people, would think more about our feelings and be with each other in those things, because that's really where we start.
So this is really gorgeous. I want to close with a question I wasn't expecting to ask, but I'm flashing back to when we first launched this organization. And doing digital Jewish learning at all was framed as an attack. Very center field, prominent Jewish folks, as a matter of course, were talking about Jewish programming that would happen through online modalities, Jewish learning online, as a threat more than anything positive. It was a not Jewish. It was something antagonistic to Jewish communal life, something that would, lead to mixed dancing. No, lead to people not participating in offline stuff because they'd have no need for it anymore because they can get everything online. I never thought that was the case, but it's making me reflect that there's a way in which when offline learning becomes a kind of learning, and there's also online learning, that's the only way you can talk about what online and offline learning are each good at. You have to have those categories. And look, a lot of the fight, it's not at all the same situation and the stakes are so much different, but there are people who argue that cisgender is not a kind of gender. The existence of trans as a category, and the way that Dan was talking about it, allows those of us who are cis to actually understand our own gender more effectively. That requires us to celebrate those categories in the first place. So I wanted to close with a question about offline, because this show has not, to the degree I would actually like to, always been rah, here's what's great about offline learning, because we're so busy defending against those who attack online learning sometimes, which has lessened in recent years, but still happens. I like to tell folks, here's my list of things I do more now offline because I also do online Jewish teaching. I sing in a group more. If I'm doing a learning activity offline, I will usually kick it off with singing together. That's not something I did until 5-6 years ago. Because I've realized that's a nugget that we get to do offline. You can't sing together online in the same way. I am more likely to do something involving throwing a ball, some kind of participatory, tangible action with a group of people. Because again, I only get to do that when I'm doing offline teaching. I'm more likely to do things involving smells. There's nothing I like more now than doing Havdalah, the service that involves smelling spices. You can't smell spices in a Zoom room together. You can each do it on your own, but you're not smelling the same spices. And part of the power of that ritual is that you're smelling the same spices. So I guess I'm curious, as we close, I know you've done some offline programming recently, including with our friends at Shalmala and in LA and in New York. You've been doing some of this. What's some of the power that we can learn about offline learning, Davka, specifically because the four of us are so immersed in online learning?
So in the way that I know immediately what I miss when I'm in person, what I miss when I'm online is the in-between time. is the coffees, the teas, the snacks, the walk between your classroom when they told you and handed you, like, this is what we're going to be reading today. And you go with your chavruta and you go sit. That walk together where there's no expectation that anything is happening. That's where a lot of relationship grows in community, is those little moments. We try to prioritize little moments like that. I encourage schmoozing as not just also Torah, but a core part of the Torah that's going to happen in their chavruta time and their partnered learning, that getting to know the person next to you is essential. What we also miss is a physical space and creating that kind of communal, we were all here. We all made this space feel sacred. Though I have to give props to Lexi for really changing how we think about that at the Torah studio as space. We're actually really trying to harness ourselves as both an online and offline school that has a classroom, right? We use a classroom, a Zoom classroom, and we actually go in at the beginning of every quarter and Lexi lets people know someone was sitting in that box yesterday. In that exact same Zoom square that you are currently sitting in, someone was sitting there. Someone was there. Someone was learning. That Zoom box is a chair full of Torah. And I think that that is also allowing us to think about offline as also being emailing each other and thinking about what moments that people are thinking about one another, are meeting separately. The offline aspect is, for me in the end, because Torah, I think, as a book or as a source sheet online or not online, a lot of this stuff actually ends up overlapping pretty similarly. But not only have people gotten a little quieter about their critiques of online Jewish learning, but I think the fact that there have been a quieting of the critiques, which came a lot from a reaction, right? We were thrown into an online space that wasn't ready for us. Now we are really creating online spaces that were made for us, knowing what is possible and what isn't, and trying to find really honest ways to be present with one another. That is the thing that links those two.
Something that learning online has taught me about how to teach in offline spaces is Liana came up with this thing where, like, in a Zoom room, you've all got your little name in the corner. And then at the end of the class, as a way of just taking a second to like sit and synthesize for yourself, we change our Zoom name to a word or phrase that we're sitting with, and then we all take a screenshot together. So when we're learning in offline, it's like, I would never have thought of this, but like everyone comes in, you get a name tag and you have your name on it. That's like the little name on your Zoom screen. And then at the end of the session in person, you get another name tag and you put a little word or phrase you're thinking of, you cover your old name tag with it, and then we all take a picture together. And like, isn't that so nice? To like create a document. Like, it's so easy online to create documents and records. And let's bring a little bit more of that in person. That's also really special. To the point about like being able to conceive of something as a kind of thing, as a category of something, and not just like as this is of course what it is and anything else is a horrible deviation. That to me is like ultimately about a feeling. Like, you didn't realize you had this thing about yourself. You didn't realize that you were cis and that meant something about who you are. You didn't realize you were trans, that meant something about who you are. And now you're confronted with the opposite of it. You're confronted with online learning. That's like a confrontation about who you are or about what you do that can be scary. And that's like the same kind of thing that I think the Torah is at its best when we let it confront us with stuff that makes us feel angry or scared or unhappy. Let that happen and see what we can learn from it. We can only actually have those feelings and respond instead of react when we feel fundamentally safe. That's basically what we try to do at the Torah studio. Whoever you are, we want you to feel, we work so that you should feel safe when you show up, so that you can actually engage with the Torah and build your own relationship with it and be able to do that with others.
Thank you so much, Lexi and Liana, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much, especially for letting me have the metaphor of Torah with a shadow. I'm, really floored by that.
I'll be thinking about it for weeks, if not years.
100%, Dan planted a really good seed with that notion of shadow as a way of understanding Torah as this two-dimensional, then generator of three-dimensional, generator of four-dimensional idea. We hope that all of you will be thinking about this moving forward. But we want to close things out. Before we do, a reminder that the Oral Talmud, our new podcast in the Judaism Unbound family of podcasts, is alive and well. You can listen to it in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can also check out our website for it at oraltalmud.com or judaismunbound.com/oral talmud. You won't want to miss it. Dan and B'nai are amazing co-hosts and spirited chavrutas, study partners. It's a wonderful, wonderful show to dive into. Now, we will encourage you to be in touch with us, and here are the different ways you can do so. First, you can hit us up via Instagram or Facebook. Our handles for those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode and all of our others. And last but not least, you can always email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. We are currently on the lookout for folks who would potentially like to sponsor an episode of Judaism Unbound. You can do so just as an individual if you want your name shouted to the world as somebody supporting our work, or you can do it anonymously. And you can be in touch with us about that at hello, HELLO, at judaismunbound.com. We would love to hear from you. We would love to shout your voice out to the world, shout your organization out. Just let us know if you are interested in sponsoring us. So we are grateful to you for listening. We hope that you'll do so again in the future. Thank you so much. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.